All right, here we go. It's a little later than I normally put out the Life Steps class stuff, but to be honest with you, I was going to take the week off, and instead, I decided that I would share with everyone what I shared at prayer meeting. And hopefully, this touches you the way it touched me. We're going to be looking at Psalm tonight instead of Isaiah, and it's a very specific type of genre in Psalms. And there's been a couple times in my life where I've wondered why the wicked were so prosperous, and it really bugged me that they just seemed to get away with everything, and I just everything was going bad for me, and people turned on me, made up false accusations against me, and honestly, it seemed like I was abandoned by God, and there was really no hope. And I knew that wasn't true, but that's what my experience was telling me. I was almost fired twice at a job, and it was because these false accusations kept coming up, and they came up twice with absolutely no basis whatsoever, and I was really hurt that, people that didn't even know me were saying stuff about my motives, saying stuff about things that I did, and just making up these terrible accusations that had no basis in reality, but they were taken as serious, and it really, really hurt me, cut me to my core, and I was so frustrated, and there was nothing I could do about it. I thought, how can they just get away with making up lies about me? I was indignant. I was angry at them. And no, I wasn't necessarily angry at God, but I was at them. But then you start to think, and you're like, were they part of God's plan all along? You see, the people of Israel had some serious enemies. My problems, in the grand scheme of things, they weren't that big. But in the nation of Israel, they had some real enemies. All the nations around them at one point either tried to kill them or enslave them. Assyria, Philistines, the nation of Edom was a thorn, Egypt. And there were laments written about these times when the enemy was winning and the people of Israel were in a very bad spot. But, instead of reading the entire book of Lamentations, I thought we could just take a look at the Psalm, Psalm 58. Is there a time when Christians should lament or be angry with the world? Is there a place for this type of language in Christianity? There's what's called the imprecatory Psalms. These are Psalms that are almost a lament over the wicked, but they would incur what would seem to be the wrath of God on the wicked. And I feel like I definitely have prayed something similar to these. So I wanted to kind of look at this and see how we are to handle these types of psalms or prayers when we come across them in the Bible. They're poetry in general, and tonight we're going to be looking at Psalm 58. So let's go ahead and read through it. It's only 11 verses, so let's get right into it. Verse 1. Do you indeed speak righteousness, you silent ones? Do you judge uprightly, you sons of men? No, in heart you work wickedness. You weigh out the violence of your hands in the earth. The wicked are estranged from the womb. They go astray as soon as they are born, speaking lies. Their poison is like the poison of a serpent. They are like the deaf cobra that stops its ear, which will not heed the voice of the charmers, charming ever so skillfully. Break their teeth in their mouth, O God. Break out the fangs of the young lions, O Lord. Let them flow away as waters which run continually. When he bends his bow, let his arrows be as if it was cut in pieces. Then let them be like a snail which melts away as it goes, like a stillborn child of a woman, that they may not see the sun. Before your pots can feel the burning thorns, he shall take them away as with a whirlwind, as in his living and burning wrath. The righteous shall rejoice When he sees the vengeance, he shall wash his feet in the blood of the wicked, so that men will say, surely there is a reward for the righteous. Surely he is God who judges in the earth. So the overall theme of this psalm is clearly anger against wickedness. Starting in verse 1 and 2, here he's clearly upset with the fact that the godless think they can judge man. They think they have a higher moral code. The idea here is that they look down on others in verse 1, while their hearts and actions are completely opposite. He says, do you indeed speak righteousness, you silent ones? Do you judge uprightly, you sons of men? No, in heart you work wickedness. You weigh out the violence of your hands in the earth. So he's like, are you telling me what's right and wrong? Meanwhile, your actions and your words are pure wickedness. Can you feel the frustration here? There's a very real truth to this. The wicked believe that they are right. Their entire life is built on their own hypocritical moral code that's relative to whatever they feel that day. And I know that's hard to hear, but it's true. In other words, who do you think you are? But the psalmist doesn't let up at this point. In verse 3, he keeps going that the wicked are terrible from birth. They speak lies as soon as they are born. Well, what kind of lies? Well, the kind of lies that we just read about in verses 1 and 2. Lies about what is right and wrong. Isn't that the crux of most disagreements today? What is right and what is wrong? They speak lies from birth because they make up their own moral code. And then they look down on you for not having their moral code. Verse 4 and 5 compares them to a serpent, a deaf serpent that doesn't listen anymore. I mean, it's a pretty vivid picture if you've ever seen a snake charmer before with, the flute or whatever, and the snake comes up and he's watching and he's mesmerized. But the picture here is that the snake goes deaf and just doesn't care what the charmer's doing. So are the wicked before God. They turn a deaf ear to God and the things of God, and they don't care what he has to say. But here it comes, all right? So we have that, and then we have the big shebang here, which I call the curse. Read verses 6 through 9 here with me. Break their teeth in their mouth, O God. Break out the fangs of the young lions, O Lord. Let them flow away as waters which run continually. When he bends the bow, let his arrows be as if cut in pieces. Let them be a snail which melts away as it goes, like a stillborn child of a woman that may not see the sun. Before your pots can feel the burning thorns, he shall take them away as with a whirlwind, as in his living and burning wrath. So there's a couple things that the author says here. Breaking away the teeth in the mouth, tearing out the fangs of the young lions, water that goes nowhere, arrows that have no power, a snail that dissolves into slime, and a stillborn child that never sees life, and pots that crumble and are swept away, that are pointless. And these are cool images that the author believes God should do to the wicked. These are some words that we may think the author should do to the wicked. But why? Well, because of verse 10 and 11. The righteous shall rejoice when he sees the vengeance. He shall wash his feet in the blood of the wicked, so that men will say, surely there is a reward for the righteous. Surely he is a God who judges in the earth. There is a reward for righteous living. And the psalmist here is praying for that day, praying that he sees that day. And the psalmist here is David. And this is just, you can feel in his heart, God, I don't know what you're doing, but please don't let the wicked go unpunished. Let me see that you are a good and pure judge. Now, we know that God does not delight in the death of sinners. This is true, and he wishes that all would come to repentance. This is also true, but understand this. God hates sin, hates it with a passion. See, in Genesis, God wiped out the entire earth because of sin, except for 8 people. And 3,000 years later, though, he would come to die for sinners. So the idea is that you don't equate God's wrath on mankind as God's hatred for man. He hates sin, and there's a big difference. So how do we view the laments or the imprecatory psalms? I mean, we can identify with this, right? We see how the wicked have prospered. We see how they lie and come up with their own sense of morality, and how they look down on others for not having their superior sense of morality. I can identify with this psalm. But how do I process it? How do I use this in my life? Why did God leave it for me, a 21st century American? To understand him, to grow in knowledge of him, to grow in faith of him. But wait, how would God use a passage like this to increase my faith? You got to look at it and how it fits in the whole of Scripture. God's going to punish sin. And in our asking of God to punish sin, ensure that we are not vengeful. That's not what this psalm is saying. He's asking God to be a righteous judge, to do what is right, because God's moral code is not relative. And David knows that. David knows the standards of God. And so he's asking a couple things here. And none of them is that God destroys the wicked. You have to look at what position the world is in here. The position of the world that David is praying about is a position of loss from the moment they're born. And in their lostness, they refuse to look at God like that snake. And they build their life on hypocrisy. And that informs us that we don't need to worry about their standards of morality or trying to impress them by keeping their standards, because their standards are not God's. You know, is it right to love everyone by accepting all kinds of behavior? No, that's not love, even remotely. The psalm, though, also calls down a curse, but it's a soft curse. Breaking the teeth in the mouth, tearing out the fangs of the lions, water that goes nowhere, arrows that have no power, snails that dissolve into slime, stillborn child that never sees life, pots that crumble and are swept away. In other words, you see a theme here of futility. David is asking God to make the ways of the sinners futile. Take the teeth out, dull the arrows, make them absolutely pointless. That's what he's asking. But it does end, though, as we see here, with a final judgment. But not out of hate, because he wants to see God's judgment on sin. Don't we all? I mean, every single person I know of that I've ever met wants God to judge sin. Whether or not they acknowledge that is another thing. But we all want sin to be wiped out. And so the psalmist here is no different. He wants to see sin gone, defeated. And he promises someday in the Bible that God will wipe out sin. And so I hope this study of this psalm gives you a good insight into this type of writing when you encounter it, that you understand that, you know, what is going on in the mind of the author here, the imagery that's used. It's pretty cool. And finally, you'll see how and why God put psalms like this in his word. They're not vengeful. They are calling down the righteous judgment of God, because just like us, we don't want to see sin in the world. I started out this story with the idea that, you know, the story of people making up lies about me, just because it was a political game. They wanted to get me fired. It was a political game way higher than my pay grade. And the idea wasn't that I wanted revenge on them. Never. As a matter of fact, I have nothing against them. But what I want to see is I want to see sin gone. I want to see those lies taken out, dulled. I want to see the effects of sin gone. And that's what this type of psalm is. And so when you see it, don't be afraid of it. This isn't vengeful. Your feelings about life can be found in the Psalms. There's so many Psalms, 150 of them, and they all address just about every feeling known to man. And so, you can pray to God who delights in hearing from you, and you can pray to him honestly. You don't have to hold back. He already knows your heart. So he wants you to talk to him, even about the hard stuff. This is a relationship. So, I hope you learned something. I hope your faith is increased tonight by the reading of this word, Psalm 58. Go ahead and go study it even more if you want. And I'll see you next week, church. Bye.